Hello, Amelia and David, and thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
Amelia, would you like to introduce yourself and give us a little bit of information on your background and sort of what you're up to today?
So I'm Amelia. I just recently left like 2 months ago during the whole lockdown thing. So a lot of people don't know yet. I've been in the church since I was born. My family was raised in it. I'm a fourth generation, I think. And now I'm just trying to figure out how to get by without angering anybody in the house or causing any like uprising in the church that I was at.
When you say that you haven't spoken to anybody yet, you're in your parents' house now. Do they know about the decisions that you've made?
Yeah, they were not happy at first. They're still not happy. I think we've kind of reached a consensus about it though, so they're not like hostile about it anymore, but they still don't really agree with my leaving. The conversation that we had would always go back and forth from you're going in the wrong direction and what if God punishes you for this to like what is the church gonna think? Like they all respected you, they all loved you, and now you're just leaving, stuff like that. Yeah.
David, so hi to you as well. Would you like to introduce yourself and give us a little bit of information?
Of course, yeah. So I was not raised in the church particularly, but I kind of came to it on my own when I was about 17. So met some people there, kind of got more rooted into it. And then after I finished high school, I enrolled in seminary, and I kind of became ordained through that tradition. And I was involved with um, their high school ministry and like young adults, things like that. So I was actually like preaching and leading for about 2 years, and then I think I had been at the church for about 5 years when I left, which was just last year.
Okay, is there a particular reason why you decided to leave the church?
It wasn't super actually at choice at first. I had told my father and brother privately that I was gay and to come out to them, and had asked them to keep it between the three of us until I could finish my school and get my degree. But then I got a phone call from a pastor the next morning and found out my brother had outed me to the church. So at that point, I was asked to leave.
That's such an invasion of your privacy.
Definitely.
Amelia, you're shaking your head. Is this like a common theme within both of your churches?
So the reason I left was because my parents, even though I was living on campus, so I was out of the house, they would track my phone and they would read my text messages and like they would tell pastor everything. And that just led to a lot of like conversations with pastor, or like the very last service I ever went to was him trying to cast a demon out of me. So
Oh my goodness.
yeah.
So, I've seen, unfortunately, that like my situation was more mild compared to what I saw happen to a lot of other people in similar circumstances. So I actually had a pretty tame exit in comparison to those.
So, Amelia, when you talk about somebody trying to cast a demon out of you, what does that actually look like from within your church?
Usually bring the entire church around. They say it's to like they all pray for you, but I think it's mainly just so everybody knows your business. For me, he was just like talking about how I had like evil thoughts and stuff. And then it was just he would put his hands on my head and he would like shake me and start screaming and stuff.
I've read a lot about the speaking in tongues part of Pentecostalism, but I read a lot about falling into the spirit. Is that what that looks like? Where you fall over because the spirit of God has entered your body?
Yeah. And a lot of times for me, it was just more like a peer pressure thing. Like everybody else was doing it. And if you didn't do it, then like you must have had something wrong with you, you know?
Oh, absolutely. Because if you don't kind of participate, you get singled out for being the only one who's not passed out on the floor, and people notice that kind of stuff. There's some pressure for sure.
So it seems like there's a ton of peer pressure. There's also a lot of promoting, spying on each other. These are all common themes of cult management and management of control and ways to control people's behavior. And it's interesting that you've experienced these, even though you're both from different denominations of the church. From what I've read, a lot of people get snake handling confused as a main part of Pentecostal practice, but actually that's only some fringe denominations.
Definitely. I actually had been in the church for almost 4 years and never even heard of it, which is how uncommon it was. I heard of it from someone that was outside of the church. Actually, they had kind of brought it up as a joke, like, "Oh, something about like bring out the rattlesnakes." I was like, I don't have any snakes. So what are you talking about?" And then like the whole thing came out that people do that. I think it happens. I've heard stories of it happening. I don't think it's that common though.
I also, like, the only time I've ever even heard of it was when, like, other people would talk to me about it, and I'd be like, I've never been anywhere near a snake. I don't care to be near snakes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You've both talked a lot about the pastor of your church and how much of an influence the pastor had on your congregations.
There are things in the Bible that are like, you have to follow the man of God and stuff, which it does say that to make every life decision under the will of your pastor. Like, I had to ask about college, I had to ask about friends, and I had to ask about dating. And most of the time, the only guys that he would let me date ended up being terrible, like very abusive, very dominant, because you're also supposed to be under the will of your husband eventually. If someone in the church finds out that you're doing something sketchy, they have to tell the pastor, or they don't have to, but because there's always this saying that's like, if you're doing something wrong, pastor will always find out. And it's like, yeah, because people are just going to rat you out about it. Any aspect of your life, you have to bring it to pastor. Like, when I quit my job to go to school, I had to make sure it was okay with him because I couldn't pay tithes anymore, stuff like that.
And is this a common theme for the sort of adults in the church and people that are older than the pastor?
Yeah, like even elders, if they were going to buy a new house or if they were going to retire, they still have to bring that stuff to pastor and ask basically for his permission.
So mostly any big financial decisions go through the pastor.
I don't know that I experienced like the tattletaling quite as much. It definitely happened for sure. I never was in a situation where it was openly encouraged. So I don't think I ever felt that pressure to like tell on people, so to speak, quite as much. But I think more so in like the older people of the church, that was definitely present because the attitude was more so like, oh, if someone's doing something wrong and you know about it, but you don't help them, then like it's your fault if they like end up sinning or if they end up, being deceived by Satan, then like you led them astray. And like, so I think people, because of that, kind of felt like guilty for things they didn't do. So I think that was very much used as a way to kind of influence people to kind of keep to themselves and kind of only talk about very select things that wouldn't get a lot of attention. As far as the decision making, that was certainly present. So you had to get the pastor's permission for most things. It was like where you go to school, if you would quit a job, you would get a different job. If you would date someone, if you would, propose to somebody that you were dating, those all had to be run by the leadership of the church beforehand.
Okay, and if these decisions that are run past the pastor seem to be mostly ones around finances, was it expected that a portion of what money you earned was given to the church?
Absolutely, yeah. Anyone who works at all, if you were, 16 with your first job ever, or if you just like, even if you were like got like an allowance from your parents, you were, underage, you were expected to give 10% of any kind of income to the church.
Yeah.
And what would happen if you just decided that wasn't something you were going to do, or did that ever happen?
For me, especially when I didn't have a job and like I was just making like barely any money doing like random babysitting, my pastor would be like, even if you only make $1, you have to give like 10 cents of that. And when I didn't, he'd be like, well, we can't use you in the church. Like, you can't be a singer. You can't like be a Sunday school teacher. You can't be involved at all unless you pay your tithes.
And were those things that you wanted to be involved in?
Yes. Well, another problem with it was like, if you were already involved in that stuff and then pastor made you step down, it would cause a lot of like gossip in the church, like you must have done something wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah. I mean, they always say it's for your own good and not to embarrass you, but like I don't think they would hold it over your head so much if it wasn't supposed to be used as a scare tactic almost. Judgmental Pentecostal people are pretty mean sometimes.
Yeah.
The overarching theme of all of the research that I've done is the holier than thou.
Sounds accurate. Yeah.
I'm definitely not proud of it, but like growing up in the environment where they tell you these things, like I didn't have friends in high school unless I was in my mind thinking like I'm obviously better than them and I need to convert them or they're going to hell, you know?
Yeah.
And like I said, I'm not proud of it, but when you grow up in that area where that's all they tell you, there's really nothing else. Yeah.
Definitely. I think I came into it when I was a little bit older, but she said as well, it's you're not really encouraged to have friendships with people outside of the church, and if you are, there's always an end game. There's always an agenda of, oh, I'm gonna save their soul and I'm gonna get them to come here too, and it's never just for the sake of like just a pure friendship or
the us versus them doctrines. If you don't come over to this side, then you'll burn in hell.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely.
Amelia, you spoke a lot about how that's terrified you for a very long time. The thought that, if you leave the church, these things will happen to you.
Yeah. And even like when I was in church, like even when I was like super devout in the religion, like I never felt like I was good enough to get into heaven. Like I have nightmares and I have panic attacks when there are storms because I'm always worried that God's coming back and I'm just gonna die.
Me too.
And so
yeah.
April said to me this morning, I don't worry about the devil anymore, except when I watched Hereditary last year and I'd gotten home at midnight and the air pressure of me closing the door to my apartment made my attic door swing open. I screamed, so I played worship music all night just in case.
Yeah. It's either play Christian music all night or just like rock back and forth in your bed like, God, I'm sorry. I don't know what I did.
Absolutely.
How do you think it would feel to have a family member, or do you know how it feels to have a family member who's not following your religion and being worried for their well-being?
My mom's side of the family has kind of left the church. And I remember like growing up thinking like, well, they'll be sorry eventually because they talk bad about their religion, which I know is wrong now. But like growing up, I was like, well, they're just not going to get into heaven then. I wasn't ever like sad about it. I was more like kind of cocky about it. Just like, well, if they're just going to act that way, then whatever. Yeah.
I'd say so, which I don't know if I felt that as much on a personal level because I was really the only one in my family that was a part of that group specifically. So that was kind of just what I had always known. But when I saw that happen more so in real time, kind of my friends and their parents, people that would choose to kind of break away, I felt it kind of on their behalf. But very similar to what Amelia said, it wasn't even really like a sadness, which you would think maybe you were supposed to feel, but it's more so like, well, that's what you get. Like, yeah.
In your notes that you sent over, David, you said that a heterosexual marriage was the be-all and end-all of any relationship from within the church.
Absolutely.
Right. It had to be either to Assembly of God or to UPCI. Like they couldn't.
That's true. There anything as far as even similar groups that weren't your group specifically was discouraged as well.
So relationships outside of your denomination were discouraged. What about the doctrine of other denominations? Was that also seen as was that seen as heresy or?
Definitely. I know that, like with the Assemblies of God specifically, we're the only ones that are correct. Our theology is the only correct one. Even any kind of other form of Christianity at all, Catholics, Baptists, other Protestants, anything else, they were all deceived by the devil, and we were the only ones that knew the truth.
I think for us it was more of a competition, like, oh well, we believe in oneness, and like, oh well, we wear long skirts, or oh well, we speak in tongues.
Yeah.
It was like one was always better than the other.
So you're a non-married couple and you're within the UPCI, for example, but you're still not allowed to live together?
Oh no, definitely not.
No, not until you're married. You can't even be in the same room, like alone together.
There was a friend of mine who had been with her fiance for going on 10 years, but they had a wedding date set, but had not had the wedding yet. And they moved in together, signed a lease, and then the church said either, you have to get married right now or you have to leave the church. And, they couldn't really have a wedding at the moment for financial reasons. They had, plans and things, so they left.
That must be difficult at the moment for people that aren't isolating together. that aren't married, haven't been able to see each other for, coming up to 3 months now.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, on a side note quickly, do you think that people who have had to take these 3 months away from the church have had time to step back and maybe reflect on some things that are maybe not working for them in the same way that you two have managed to?
Yeah. I've noticed that the ex-Pentecostal group on Reddit has grown a lot since the quarantine. And I think it's just because, like, people are starting to, like, settle down and be like, well, we haven't been to church in a couple months and I still don't feel like, like worshiping the devil or something like that. So it's not a big deal.
When they talk about the heterosexual relationships, was there ever a point where you were worrying about the time where you would have to speak to them?
Absolutely. That was something that I was kind of always terrified of, and there were points where I was, like dating women just for the sake of, not having to have that conversation.
Were they women within the church?
They were, yeah. So that was, people that they would know and, approve of and whatever. So that I knew that any time, that happened, I wouldn't enjoy it, but I knew that it would kind of postpone the inevitable as far as, me revealing things that they wouldn't care to hear.
Coming out for a person, I think, is a significant moment in their life. And do you feel like that was taken away from you?
Yes and no. Maybe not as a whole, because I still had the chance to kind of tell people on an individual level, kind of the way I wanted to. But it definitely, I think, put me in a situation where I had to do that sooner than I would have liked to. I know, again, anything, premarital is not allowed. Like, our situation wasn't quite as strict as Amelia's was, I believe. Like, you could still go on dates and be alone, together. But, like, there was no, affection, like, publicly. Like, there was no holding hands, kissing, hugging, certainly nothing sexual was supposed to happen if you weren't married. That was a really big thing. Like, I know, like, there were situations where, like, parents would find out, like, their teenage children had, like, been, inappropriate, and they would be, like, brought on stage on a Sunday morning to, air their dirty laundry, and they would either, like, have to, repent publicly on a microphone, they, like, maybe couldn't come back. It was really, I think the sexual aspect in particular was very, like, focused on and singled out, especially for younger people. Yeah, drinking, absolutely not. No drinking, no smoking. Any kind of, like, non-Christian music was not allowed. So you either had to listen to, like, hymns or like some type of contemporary Christian music, but nothing like, no top 40 radio and no rock music. You couldn't listen to like the Beatles or anything, even that's kind of like tame, by modern standards. That was not allowed at all.
And what was the reasoning behind that?
Just that you would be influenced to like have an incorrect idea, of the world and of God, that you would just be influenced by the secular music that was kind of, everything was pitted as out to get you. So if it wasn't directly from the church, then it had some type of goal to lead you astray and take you off the right path. There were even like Christian singers that if they were thought of as like not Christian enough, you couldn't listen to them either, even if it was Christian music.
Who would you ask if a band was appropriate or not?
We had like a music pastor that you could kind of run that stuff by, but ultimately, as with everything else, like the pastor of the church kind of had the final say on all that stuff as well.
We were like strictly discouraged from listening to anything remotely not Christian, like even if it was musicals or anything.
Yeah.
And the reasoning behind it was like Satan was an angel of music, and so that's how he gets people.
Yeah.
The three things that make Pentecostalism different from Christianity is the speaking in tongues, the difference in baptism, but there's also a list of standards I've found that people are supposed to follow, like holiness standards.
It's not so much for men as it is for women, and I think that's mainly just a submission thing. Women can't cut their hair. I've been made fun of many times because my hair doesn't grow very long. They always accuse me of cutting it. I can't wear makeup, like not even concealer, at least not in my church. Other churches were like whatever, but mine pretty strict on it. Can't paint your nails, not even clear. Sleeves always have to be like right there or longer. Your skirt had to be past your knees. Can't wear any jewelry unless it's a wedding ring, and even your wedding ring, it can't have a very big diamond. At least that's how it was for my church. It's not the same everywhere else, though.
What would happen if you were to come to the church and you've accidentally forgotten to take your earrings out or something?
Oh, no, you weren't allowed to wear them in public. Like, at all. You couldn't get your ears pierced. You couldn't wear them in public at all.
Wow. And if somebody was to see you out wearing your earrings, that would go straight back to the pastor?
It would go to pastor, yeah.
And then would he pull you to one side and speak to you about it? Or would it be like David's church where everybody's just sort of publicly shamed?
For me, which I never did anything big, like my problem, apparently, I had friends that were outside of the church. And so what happened was he pulled me aside privately and talked to me about it. And I thought that was it. I told him I was sorry. I told him I'd be better. And then a couple weeks later, he kind of went up in front of the whole congregation and cast a demon out of me.
David, is this something that you've seen before?
Actually, no. In our church, women could wear makeup, cut their hair. A lot of people had tattoos. Even that wasn't really something that they were concerned about. I think more of the control and morality was more so around relationships, intimacy, really more than anything else. The biggest thing that I can really, I guess, equate with Amelia's experience is just alcohol was absolutely a no-no. We all drink anyway, but they didn't know about that.
Have either of you managed to speak in tongues?
I think I thought I was at the time, but hindsight's 2020, I guess. Now it's kind of those are some cool noises, I guess.
Talk me through how that happens and what it's all about and the experience and how you end up in that situation where you think that it's happening.
Well, I remember the first time I did it, I was 7, and I remember being is this really what they've all been talking about? Because it doesn't really seem that great. But I think they kind of teach you to do it because, like I said, I was kind of raised in it, so I saw how it worked. They'll do this thing where they'll kind of hit your chin like that sometimes, and it'll kind of train your jaw to move up and down, I guess.
So wall?
Yeah, kind of like that. Yeah, and I think a lot of it has to do with emotions. When you're crying a lot, you kind of just you start saying things like gibberish and stuff. Because, not all the time, but usually when you're really emotional, people can't really understand what you're saying. I think that was kind of what it was in the Bible. And I think I'm leaning more towards agnostic, so I don't really know if this is correct. But the whole speaking in tongues thing in the Bible is nothing like what Pentecostals try to teach you nowadays. Because in the Bible, it's supposed to be when you speak it, either there's an interpreter that can tell everybody what you're saying, or you're speaking and anybody from any language can understand what you're saying. That's supposed to be what it is. It's not just saying random syllables until people understand he's got the spirit. That's not what it's supposed to be.
Where does the whole speaking in tongues come from? It comes from a particular part of the Bible.
It does, yeah. And just having been a theology student for a while, I really hit that pretty well. It's in scripture, it exists, especially in the book of Acts in the New Testament, but it's very much supposed to be the Apostle Paul talks about you have your own spiritual language. It's just between you and God. It's not meant to be understood. And that's more so you're alone praying in your room with the door closed, so that way it doesn't matter if people can understand you or not. But then when in I believe it's 2 Corinthians, he says there's supposed to be someone that can understand you. This is God's gift. Get a message to somebody that maybe you wouldn't know it in the language that you speak. So that wasn't supposed to be this gibberish kind of speaking. It's supposed to be an actual human language that you just wouldn't have known otherwise. So outside of those two contexts, there's not really any kind of backing for what they talk about, So that's why you go to a Sunday night service and then there's people kind of slobbering and smacking you on the forehead and telling you have the spirit. It's not really what the Bible was talking about.
Is it an overwhelming experience?
It is a lot of emotion-driven stuff. They encourage you to cry, and honestly, most of the time, if you don't cry while you're speaking in tongues, they'll just assume that you're not actually doing it right. I think for when you first do it, it's because for me, I have a lot of anxiety, and there were a million people around me, and so I started crying, and then they were you're getting it, and so I was okay, well, I guess this is what it's supposed to feel like. And so most of the time you just cry and then just say a few words, and that's it.
Did you ever look over the room and see somebody else sort of struggling in the same way that you were and feeling uncomfortable?
Yeah, I brought this Catholic girl to a youth rally, which you don't know what that is, but for Pentecostals, it's like a church on steroids because it's just a bunch of young people jumping around and stuff.
Yeah.
And most Catholic churches, they're just they're very stoic, they're very reverent, and they just kind of sit in silence and they pray. this was the first Pentecostal service she'd ever been to. And so she had a huge meltdown during it where people thought she was getting the spirit. And I had to apologize to her many times afterwards. She was not happy.
David, you're nodding away there. I'm guessing this is something that you've experienced as well.
Absolutely. You know, just being involved kind of with like youth ministry and young adults for as long as I was. You know, I had been to many a youth camp. So there was always like the one friend that wasn't Pentecostal that somebody brought with them, you know, to summer camp, and they just look like everyone's insane and they're like, don't want to be there. Yeah.
These youth camps, was it encouraged that you brought somebody along with you that wasn't already in the church?
They would give you money if you brought people that were from outside the tradition, for sure.
So this is how you would bring more people into the church.
Yeah, it was hugely like incentive driven. Like sometimes you get money, sometimes you get like perks. Like my church camp would be like, you got to ride around in the golf cart all week, or you got like first in line at the snow cone stand, stuff like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Were there any other methods of indoctrination that they were encouraging you to use?
It varied, I think, for us somewhat by age groups. Like we would use some of the similar ways Amelia mentioned. That you were like younger, kind of like high school age, but because like we had a separate one that was kind of more for college age students. So like when they would come, they'd be like, "Oh, hey, like if you convince somebody to come, we'll you have to take off work to go. We'll pay you for like the hours you missed at work if you come to this camp." So they made it a little more, I guess, relevant to people that were older.
I kind of wish I had that experience. For us, it was
Right.
like, you don't take off work, like you obviously don't care enough about God.
Right. Then you're greedy and you love money more than the Lord, and
Yeah, so we wouldn't get paid. We would get paid in the spirit. So
right.
One of the things that I wanted to draw on that you had said, Amelia, was that the pastor would say to you, after this service, you'll feel like what you believe in is wrong.
Mhm.
That was said to you, that was a common theme at the end of your services?
A lot of the times, like especially if it was like a really like fired up service where people have been jumping around and stuff, the pastor would always make a point to get up and be like, after this service, like you might feel like what you've done is stupid, or like the revelations that you have were just in the moment and emotional, and they would be like, that's just the devil trying to keep you from doing what you're actually supposed to be doing. I don't know if that's a thing with David, but that was a very big thing with ours.
No, absolutely. I think that, we reached out to you on Reddit. You mentioned that, like, controlling of thoughts, things like that. And that was definitely how they went about that. Anytime that you had a doubt or, thought that something just like, didn't make sense, or, you were questioning things, that was always the devil. The devil was making you doubt things. The devil was trying to take you away from the experiences that you had and kind of talk you out of believing in the truth, things like that. So, like, everyone was like either didn't voice the concerns they had because they didn't want people to think they were being deceived by Satan, or they just like wouldn't even say anything, acknowledge it to themselves, because they thought like, oh, I can't think that way. It's evil to question anything.
Public shamings in your church were a common thing.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Did you ever experience any of this personally?
I was offered to experience it, I guess. As I mentioned earlier, like I was kind of outed, somewhat by my brother. So at that point, I'd been there for 5 years. I was super involved. I was in theology school. I was like leading the worship services. I was preaching to the high school students, things like that. So I guess had a lot to lose in that sense. So pastor said, hey, like I'm willing to kind of look the other way and like forgive you, basically, but you have to come up on stage on Sunday on a microphone and like apologize, say like, oh, you made it up, and you're not actually gay. You didn't mean it. Like, basically just kind of take back everything that I had said. So I guess I had the opportunity for a public shaming, but I did not take him up on that.
And that's when you stepped back from the church and decided to leave?
Yes, absolutely.
They do have a way of like trying to get you to tell on yourself. Like when I had my conversation with pastor, it went like, well, you seem like you've been kind of in a fog lately. And in my head, I was like, well, I've been in a fog for quite a long time, and you're just now saying something. And I'd be like, well, I'm just starting college, and so it's kind of stressful and stuff. And he'd be like, are you sure you're not talking to people that you're not supposed to be talking to? And I'd be like, I don't think so. I think I'm doing fine. And then he would just keep adding onto it until I would like say it myself. I'm like, if you already know, then why don't you just save us all some time?
Yeah. So if he says things 10 times, maybe you'll say it and agree with him.
Yeah.
Oh, now you've said it 10 times. Maybe actually you're right.
Yes.
So David, you decided to leave the church at that point. I don't understand how somebody can stand in front of you with a straight face and say to you, just go up there and tell them that you made it all up. How can
Crazily enough, like people have done it. And I think maybe if I had like been in it longer from a younger age, maybe I would have. But I think I had connections and kind of a life outside of that. Wasn't a pleasant experience, but like I knew I'd come out of it okay. But I can see for sure how somebody that was raised in it or your whole lives, they're like, oh, my family's not going to talk to me. I'm not going to have anything, so I'll say anything I need to keep this going.
Do you think there's a lot of people trapped sort of within these churches?
Yeah,
Definitely.
You're basically not necessarily forced, but encouraged to the degree where you feel like you have to get married straight out of high school.
Yeah.
It's like I have friends who are my age who are married, and it's crazy because I feel like a child. But I think that's kind of like for them to keep you in it, like keep you more grounded in it, because
Definitely.
when you're like tied to somebody like that, you can't just think for yourself. Like even if you weren't Christian, you can't just think for yourself. You have to like have at least some kind of understanding with the person that you're with. And it's very hard to do that when they're also very indoctrinated. Or like me, I had to move back in with my parents and go to different churches on my own. What at first was like a huge hassle because they would always be like, you can't do that under my roof or things like that. You feel very codependent on the people that you're around. And especially for me, having grown up in it and don't have very many friends outside of the church, it's very hard to leave because you feel like your entire personality was just the church,
What happens with your relationship now with God? How where do you stand?
Like I said earlier, I think I'm leaning more towards agnostic because I'm a pre-med student and I've seen some pretty impossible things happen in that area where like cancer cells do just leave for no reason and stuff like that. But like at the same time, I don't think it's the same like Bible God, because there are so many contradictions in there, and there are so many times where I've tried to be like, God, I need an answer. I just need something, and if you really cared, it would help me out, and I've just gotten nothing. And so I think for me that there's still something out there. It's just not the same thing that I've been taught my whole life.
I'd have to agree more or less with Amelia. I think that like there have been things in my life that I just can't really explain. So I acknowledge that there's something. I just don't know if I'm going to put, like the Christian God space to that anymore.
What is the day of Pentecost?
Okay. He was in the seminary, so he can probably tell the story a lot better than me. But basically what I was taught was like after God ascended into heaven, or Jesus, people just like waited in this room for like 8 days and prayed for like 8 days. And then after a while, God kind of fell upon them, and it's supposed to, describe it as like a rushing wind. And like, that's when people started speaking in tongues for the first time. That's actually where like Pentecostals get it mixed up, because even the people who saw it happening were like, hey, they're speaking actual languages that they shouldn't be able to speak.
Right. I can understand them. Right.
So that's pretty much what my take on it was.
New Testament, Jesus, crucified, resurrected, and then, ascended to heaven. So I believe Pentecost is meant to be 50 days after his ascension. So he basically, told his disciples before he left, and said, hey, like, go wait in this room and, don't eat, don't sleep, don't anything. And then like Amelia said, it was 8 days, after that.
Are you practicing any kind of religion at all?
I've actually made a full 180 and I'm a witch now. So yes, I would say so.
Like Wiccan?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, explain to me a little bit more about that, because that's really interesting.
I think it always kind of had like a little bit of an appeal to me, just kind of in a vague way, like, oh, that's cool and mysterious. But, I didn't think a whole lot of it. But I think, after some time away from the church, when I had an opportunity to kind of look into things for myself, kind of look into other faiths without them being, demonized, I just kind of saw how really broad it was. And you can be, a witch and believe in every god or no god at all. And it's more so about a lot of like internal emotional things and kind of just healing and being a good person. And I thought that was nice. So This is where I ended up.
I remember, like, because I was trying to get to know both of y'all, and so I looked on y'all's profile, and I looked on David's, and I was like, that's different.
Yeah, I don't know how expected that was, but
Nothing wrong with it. I was just like, wow, that's a huge turn of events.
it was a big change. Yeah.
And do you have a group that you meet with to practice?
I do. Yeah, we unfortunately haven't been able to meet in person for a while. It's due to everything being shut down right now. But we do things like this, and we would be meeting in person, if we could.
And that's kind of suiting you a lot better. Do you feel more comfortable with the position that you're in now?
I do. It's a lot more personal experience. Just whatever resonates with you is what's true for you. No specific belief or doctrine or lack thereof even is really impressed on anybody. So it's really cool, just in the sense of how you're encouraged to think for yourself and to research and to learn and to kind of they're fine with whatever you come to. And that's not something obviously I think we would be used to in the situations that we came out of.
Mhm.
We love the independent thoughts.
Yeah.
Amelia, would you like to just talk us through kind of any of the lasting effects?
I've only been out for a couple of months, so I'm not sure how lasting effects really will affect me in the future. But I know, like I said, like storms freak me out. I live in Tornado Alley, so I mean, anytime there's a tornado or anywhere near a tornado, I'm just like, God's coming back and I'm not ready and I'm just gonna go to hell, I guess. There's also a lot of things like when I wore pants for the first time, I was like just freaked out the whole time, like this is not what I'm supposed to look like. I had like one glass of wine in my entire life, and when I first drank it, I was like, I'm gonna be sick because this is all the things that I've been told that happen. I still have a lot of like worries about if I do this and I end up being wrong, God's just gonna send me to hell. That's mainly my biggest fear, is because they teach you from children like how terrible hell is, and they use it as a scare tactic all the way up into adulthood. And so that's really my only worry, is just that anything that I could possibly do anymore could send me there.
I don't know that I've had quite that experience, but again, that could also just be that I wasn't as part of it, as long as you were, Amelia. But yeah, I think there's definitely kind of just like a general anxiety, of like, oh, what if I like get hit by a car, don't wake up today, and I was wrong the whole time, and just the kind of things like that, kind of just lingering doubts, I guess. I don't know if I can attribute that really to anything specifically, but definitely just kind of like that random fear that comes up every now and then of like, oh, what if I was wrong and I shouldn't have left?
Yeah.
Does the relief and the the independent thought and being able to kind of choose what you eat and drink and wear, do all of those things outweigh the anxiety?
For me, they certainly do. Yeah, I think that's kind of almost like how I don't become overwhelmed by it. It's because I'm like, okay, well, God is real and that's true. Then I think that we should have, like he would want us to be critical thinkers and he would want us to enjoy, the life that we have over here. So that's kind of how I get through that.
Yeah, like when I think about all the things that I could do, my first initial thought is like, you could go to hell for that. But then I'm like, yeah, but I actually have the choice to do it now. And most people think that these things are okay. So I must be okay doing them.
Right.
So even though you're encouraged to not wear makeup and to wear skirts below the knee, and and to men to keep their faces shaved and their hair neat, to be as pure on the outside as you are on the inside, I believe that's right. Why those lists of standards exist. Do you think that's okay to wear jewelry and makeup? God's not going to look at you and say, I don't like the fact that you have that tattoo, so I'm not going to allow you to be saved.
That's one of the things that I've struggled with my whole life, is those standards. Like, I never questioned them outwardly because of how they handle that. But there are a lot of bad people in the world who like murder people and assault people, and I just don't see how God would line those terrible people up with someone who just wore makeup and be like, yeah, you're all going to the same place.
Right.
And people who've tried to tell me that I'm wrong are like, the Bible says even the smallest sin is as bad as the biggest sin. But at the same time, if you're just putting something on your face, you don't even look that different. You're just maybe like covering up a pimple or something, and God's just going to be like, you wore makeup that one time, so you gotta go.
And your pimple, and it's too late now.
even if you changing your appearance outwardly does not change your, how devoted you are to who you worship. And do either of you have any advice to anybody who may be in a similar situation, starting to think maybe some things are wrong, or starting to have sort of a sense that things aren't quite adding up for them?
I'd say if anybody, because for me, I've been thinking about leaving for a very long time. And I was always like, well, the process of doing it's going to suck. And I'm going to be faced with all these people who are trying to like come against me and stuff. For me, the second that I actually left, it was just like a huge weight off my shoulders. And yeah, I still deal with some people who know that I've left, who are kind of condescending about it. But at the same time, like, you never have to face those people ever again. So the act of actually doing it is not nearly as hard as you think it's going to be.
I think I would just try and be as encouraging as I could and say that, like the life that you will have on the other side, once you have the freedom, is totally worth all of the difficulty and discomfort from leaving. And just like, which I guess is easy, just for us to say, being on the other side of it. But like, we've had these lived experiences. And so when you come out of that, like, it's difficult, it's painful, and it's a lot of pretty drastic change, but being able to live a life that's authentic is very much worth that, for sure.
That's some really good advice. That's really nice for anybody who's kind of thinking, oh, I'm not sure what if I'm making the wrong decision, or is there anywhere anybody can go to for any support or advice if they are thinking about leaving the church, but they maybe they don't have many connections or ties outside of the church?
For me, I had, and I know it's a privilege that I had this, and not everybody can have it, but when I first dealt with my parents basically like stalking me and stuff, and my pastor coming and telling me I was going to hell and whatever, I talked to my professors at my college, and they got me free therapy for it, which, like I said, not everybody can get. If you are able, you're 18, you can make your own medical decisions and stuff to get therapy. That's been the main helper with me, especially since I can't really talk to friends right now because everything's kind of shut down. Just having someone that you can talk to about your thoughts and then being able to rationally explain to you why you're thinking that was definitely helpful.
David, would you agree with that? Some type of therapy could help?
I would definitely recommend it. Yeah. I think especially like, it wasn't just kind of like, oh, I tried this church, I didn't like it, and I decided I'd go somewhere else. There's a lot of, spiritual kind of trauma and abuse that took place. I think anytime that you can get, some educated professionals to kind of help you process through that, I think that's a good idea. That's not an option that you have.
I know that there's also the ex-Pentecostal group on Reddit, and I see a lot of people offering sort of support and guidance on there for people who may be, unfortunately, more isolated than others. It's always very intelligent people that I find inside of these groups. I speak to some people about my research, and they say, how can people be indoctrinated into cults? How can they not tell that they're being manipulated? And I think it's a very common misconception that people inside of cults are weak-minded and they don't have strong spirit and they don't have strong will. Do you agree that that's a misconception?
Yeah. For me, I didn't even realize it was a cult until I started looking into it myself. It's just, like I've said, when you grow up with that kind of stuff, you really don't have any other way to think. It's not that you're weak-minded, it's just that that's the only thing you've been taught. I don't know how it is for David because he wasn't in it all his life, but that's how it was for me.
I think that they present themselves having all the answers, to life's problems. My family situation, growing up wasn't really that great. So to me, like, they had, solutions to problems I'd had, like, as long as I could remember. That really, honestly, more like than the religious aspect is what appealed to me. As, oh, like, these people, there's a community and they take care of each other, and like, they're responsible, and they'd help you out with like finding a place to live and getting a job. And it was, things that my parents hadn't really done. So I think that was kind of like my foot in the doorway. And then like, by the time I realized kind of like what was going on, it was like, oh wow, this is they present themselves very differently than what they actually practice.
So the love bombing aspect of the indoctrination, where sort of people offer to do your cooking and your cleaning and all that stuff.
Absolutely. Yeah. They offer like, oh well, like, we're all so nice, and like, we're nice because God's changed our lives. Like, come find out why we're so great, and like, they really sell it.
Yeah, but the second you leave the church, they're not going to do nothing for you anymore. They're just going to be like, you can do stuff yourself now.
Have either of you two actually brought anybody into the church and you kind of feel like you need to reach out to them and go back on anything and get them to change their minds on being a part of the church?
No, I was never able to convert anybody, and I felt like I was a failure for a long time because a big part of Pentecostalism is just getting more people into the church. But now, honestly, I'm really glad that I didn't, because, like, for one, I'd be a huge hypocrite for leaving, and also I don't know how I would be able to face them and be like, I'm so sorry, I was wrong. I don't know what kind of damage I would have caused to those people.
David, did you bring anybody into your church?
Not that I know of. I may have, like, indirectly over the years, or just kind of like having, the platform that I had, but I don't think I can recall like specific times where I've sat somebody down and like, oh hey, like, come with me. I don't think I've had any of those situations. I wasn't very successful with mission work in there. So yeah, not that I can think of.
Thank you so much for speaking to me today. I think your experiences will help other people who may be in similar situations realize that, there is happiness on the other side. There is a life outside of the church, and there are positive experiences and people who will listen to your story and not be judgmental, and be there to hold your hand and help you through. Counselling, if you can get it, obviously sounds like a really good road to go down. It sounds like that's really helped you, Amelia. I'm really glad that your parents are willing to have some kind of dialogue about your situation, because it would be awful to be in a house where that couldn't happen. Where you felt isolated and alienated. So I'm glad that you have that platform to be able to speak to them. And David, I'm glad that you are practicing being a witness, which is great, because it sounds like you don't have to feel oppressed in your sexuality. We are where we are in the 21st century, and it seems ridiculous that anybody should have to hide their sexuality in this day and age.
Definitely.
So I'm really happy that both of you seem to be in a much better place.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you so much for joining me today, Amelia and David. I really appreciate your time.
All right, thank you.
Bye.
Bye.